Welcome, everyone. It's so great to be here tonight. We're here with three amazing panelists, and I know you've looked at their work, but we're going to talk about their work, we're going to see their work, most importantly, and have a really lively discussion. Tonight's panel discussion is really looking at the intersection between art and engineering, and I'm fascinated by this intersection. I'm a filmmaker myself, and I do help run a very big documentary series, and one of the biggest things that we're looking at right now is how is storytelling changing and how is technology and engineering helping us. One of the most exciting conversations that I've been seeing happen in all sorts of quarters lately, and the most unusual places, is a conversation with people who actually understand engineering and artists and storytellers. And I have to say, it's one of the most exciting things about being at MIT is I'm seeing this happen everywhere, and I'm delighted to be here. I want to introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with Jeff. And I was hoping you could tell us, Jeff, just what we should know, the most important thing we should know about you for the discussion tonight, because you do so many amazing things.
The most important.
He's on the spot. We have to think.
Well, I guess very practically, I'm an artist who was a former scientist, or a scientist who was an artist and who could never really make the decision between the two. And I guess my primary interest is in human perception, the ways that consciousness works, and the ways that we construct meaning and construct an understanding of the world that we're in.
And did you find yourself an unusual type of person in academia when you were in science? How did that work for you?
Yeah, I guess I always say you don't go to art school to learn quantum mechanics. It's much easier to go major in physics and play music on the side. So there's always been that tension of kind of trying to find the spot, you know, how to split the time properly.
And what I was saying before is that I'm seeing the conversation happen between different people and different mediums, and I love the fact that the people on the panel tonight really play in both worlds, and that's why they're so unusual and their work is remarkable. So Alberta, I would love for you to tell us the same thing. Who are you? What do you want us to know about you?
Well, I also came from science. I was a biologist, and then I was producing science programming for television in Los Angeles. And now I make documentaries exploring the intersection of art, science, and innovation. And I've made a number of films about highly engineered artworks, and you'll see some of them tonight.
Great. And who are you trying to talk to? Like when you're doing these films, do you have a sort of idea of who it is? Is it younger people, adults?
Yeah. Well, the idea for these films is that I can help these artists and scientists reach a wider audience with their amazing ideas, to inspire audiences young and old to learn, create, and play and explore.
Great. That's great. Well, we'll get to see a lot of her work tonight as well. So Eric, tell us about who you are, and I know that you and Jeff also know each other and do a lot of work together, so just fill in those blanks as well, how you guys know each other.
Sure. I started as an engineer and then realized that I wasn't really too excited about engineering, and I realized that I could do some pretty wild things with all the skills that I learned as an engineer. And then fast forward a few years, started a firm with some other MIT guys, and we are an art and technology group. We work do a lot of projects that use like data as an artistic material, and then that's a day job. And then at night, I make music with Jeff, and I dance and sometimes make things that shake people.
I love that. That's great. You guys said you had 3 or 4 projects together? Right now?
Yeah.
At the moment, in time. Okay, great. So you guys do a lot of different things. In full disclosure, I have an 8-year-old who aspires to be an engineer, and I'm always looking at you guys like, oh, you need to meet him because he's so hungry for information about engineering. But I'm always saying, yeah, but what about the arts? Because I'm a storyteller, and I care so much about visual storytelling. And so as his mother, I'm always saying, you know, yes, I know you love math and science and technology, and I get it, and I want to help him, but I also really want to open him up to art and music. So it's really interesting to see you guys just grow up like that and do this work yourselves. So we're going to start actually with Jeff, and you're going to share some of your work with us, and then at the end of it, I'm going to talk to him. But at the end of each one of them sharing their work, you guys are going to all have a chance to ask some questions, and I really hope you will, because I'd love to have this be a real open dialogue, and that will come over Twitter, but as we said, you can raise your hand too. So let's start with you.
Sure.
You ready to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So I liked your point about trying to get your son, was it, interested in engineering, you know, and I feel like...
No, he loves engineering, but I'm trying to nurture the artistic side of him.
Okay,
right?
perfect.
I'm an unusual parent maybe in this community, but I really care about both. So it's been really interesting with him because he's so focused on math and science and technology, and he dreams to be an engineer. That's his dream.
It almost feels ironic. It feels like the easiest way to get someone into engineering is through art, art projects, and kind of we've somehow 500 years or so ago we started this kind of false divide between art and science, art and engineering. I was, as we said before, I was kind of undecided until I was like 25 how to navigate that space between art and science. I was doing physics and math at the time, randomly took a class in mechanical engineering and building things, and then started to get the bug of like, oh, I need to have my hands on something. I didn't want to be writing on paper all the time. But the first thing that kind of triggered it when I was a grad student, I took a class called Strobe Lab that's at MIT. And Doc Edgerton is the guy who invented high-speed imaging, slow-motion imaging in the 40s. And they still teach his technologies there. And I was taking a class there. And for my final project, we can bring up the slow-motion video. For my final project, I engineered a device that would let me take certain types of photos. So this is a millionth of a second exposure of a bullet being cut in half by a knife, by shooting the bullet at the knife. I made a laser trigger that the bullet would go through, and multiple lasers would measure the speed of the bullet so that you could trigger the photo at exactly the right time. If you're off by 1,000th of a second, the bullet is a foot away. So you have to have extreme precision. This is a bullet going through a falling drop of water, another millionth of a second exposure. And I guess I wanted to start with this because even things like photography, when we think of someone who's just an artist, not an engineer at all, that was based on an enormous amount of engineering. And here I was really explicitly mixing those two worlds together. The bullet is right in there, you know, about to pop out.
So explain how, though, in that situation.
So the bullet was fired from 5 feet away, would go through 2 laser triggers, and I would time the difference between the two, and that would back out the speed of the bullet, and then you'd delay a certain amount of distance to fire the strobe. This is a composite of a high-speed imaging video turned into photo. So it was becoming really clear that engineering and science and the arts were fundamentally connected because I couldn't take these shots without it. So this is a film of water drop falling into water. So just enjoy for a second. This is about 100 times slower than normal. In real life, this takes a 50th of a second. One more. So this happens all the time, right? There's all these windows in the world that we have no access to because our eyes take roughly a 50th of a second to process that kind of information. So I was doing all this work in the lab originally, and I randomly, you know, was posting things on my website and things like that. And I got a phone call from a producer at Discovery that wanted to do a TV show about slow motion. And suddenly I was thrust into the world of TV, and Time Warp was the name of the show on Discovery. We did 2 seasons of, you know, using these amazingly advanced pieces of engineering tools for the purposes of art, and ostensibly to teach science along the way. But that's how I kind of favor it. I feel like if the art is the priority in some sense, you don't even know you're learning, but you learn all this stuff in order to do the thing that you want to do emotionally. So for me, this kind of reminds me that, you know, even when you look at like a painter from the Renaissance era, they were technologists, they were engineers. We just go to the art store now and you just buy paint, and it was so difficult to develop paint. You know, there was all these stories I've read about people grinding different beetle shells to get blue because there was no way to get blue.
Right.
And so when you were Da Vinci, you were not a scientist or an artist. You were just this person on this search. And that was all. You would grab whatever was needed for that search. So there was automatically this mix, and then we've started to kind of just falsely distill out that certain things are engineering and certain things are art. So meanwhile, I was going through robotics at the Media Lab under Cynthia Brazil's Social Robots group, and started kind of learning a lot more about how to build things besides just circuitry. And I wanted to share the most recent project I've worked on, which is a couple a couple blocks from here at Biogen IDEX new corporate headquarters. So we can play the first half of this video, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. So I'll first start by saying this is a collaboration with my friend Bill and the folks at Hypersonic in Brooklyn. Some of the music that's being faded out now is a collaboration with me and Eric, as the music usually is in our art videos. Working with Biogen was the most recent commission that I've worked on, and it's a really interesting scenario of working with a company that is very, very scientific. And the concept that we came up with for their lobby was trying to explore this idea of hidden patterns in data. And the fact that when they are looking to develop a drug for multiple sclerosis, they're literally looking through petabytes of data from X-ray crystallography, trying to guess the exact shapes of these molecules that will fit in other receptor sites in the brain to cure multiple sclerosis or to treat multiple sclerosis. This is a almost intractably difficult problem. And if you just got the binary data out of that crystallography machine, it would fill many, many libraries of zeros and ones, and you'd have no perspective how to make any sense of it, right? But once you have a certain perspective on that information, suddenly there's an enormous amount of theory goes into this, but you get a crystallized image. And so we came up with that as a kind of metaphor for what they do there, how they are building such an incredible amount of technology in order to elicit an ability to theorize about how these things work and build, useful drugs to treat things.
How did you come about with, how did this idea come about? Was it in conversation? Were you inspired by this? How did this happen?
So,
in a visual sense.
Einstein has this line where he says, creativity is knowing how to hide your sources.
Yeah.
I feel like the more that I am cognizant of where ideas come from, the more I realize I have never had an original idea in my life. It's just been a weird mix of the noise that is in my environment. So in this case, a lot of it was, there's a lot of artists that explore anamorphosis, which happened as soon as the people in the Renaissance came up with 3D perspective. People started figuring out how to play around with 3D perspective. And there's an artist named Felice Farini specifically, who does these incredible, usually paintings that are on down a long hallway where if you stand in one specific spot, you just see a perfect circle, but it's actually a 100-foot deep painting on windows and walls and columns and all this sort of thing. So seeing things like that, seeing the wave machines of an artist like Ruben Margolin, who purely explores the wave nature of these molecules, is kind of picking and choosing and then falling asleep and having these ideas come up.
That's great. Do you have more to show, or is that?
I figure we should start with a brief intro, and then we have a lot of other collaborations. I work with Eric a lot of the time, so we saved some of our collaborative projects for as they come up in conversation.
So when you look at your life and what you're doing, what are you thinking the next thing is? As you think about the future, what are you thinking about?
Man, I think less and less about the future. I have this kind of funny.
Lucky. That's terrific.
It's a very weird thing, because as soon as I'm a very small shop. So it's one person, and I try to collaborate with Social Limited. I try to collaborate with Hypersonic. When I finish a job like this, it's an 8-month project, and I haven't spent any time finding the next job. So I'm unemployed the day after it ends, and I just kind of have time to simmer, and it takes some getting used to. But I usually don't know what I'm doing more than 2 weeks out in my life.
Well, we're going to come back to that. I think that's fascinating too. It's just how in this intersection do you find your way? And it seems like, of course, you are. It's beautiful. So, Alberta, I know you have a talk that you want to give with images as well, right?
Yeah, thanks,
so
Raney.
Great. Yeah, let's start.
I have some notes.
Notes are allowed.
Okay.
We're fine. Notes are good.
So, by being a fly on a wall at an artist studio or a laboratory or a hackathon or an art installation, I can give audiences a peek into a process or thinking they might not normally see. So engineered artworks are true collaborations between an artist and an engineer, and a window into the creative process. And I wanted to share some of my films I've done. My first independent film was about the largest Tesla coil ever built. And I documented the building of it in San Francisco, and it was a collaboration between an artist and an engineer. So can we show the 2 clips for Electrum, please?
I'm an artist and been an artist since I was 25. I'm 58 now.
I'm an electrical engineer by trade, and my specialty is power transmission and conversion. This is primarily a sculpture, but at the heart of the sculpture is what's known as a Tesla coil. A Tesla coil is a resonant transformer that can develop millions and millions of volts. And the end product is a display of lightning that comes out. The Electrum is a really good challenge to bring science and art together. The artist working on this has a really good handle on the aesthetic, but knows very little about high voltage. And I've had to give him a few basic rules about high voltage.
The first day when I was talking with Greg, and I said, Greg, I'd like to do a stone tower, and just a stone tower, like dry laid stone, so it's just like stone goes up and out of the top of the tower comes the lightning. And of course he shot that down like,
So that was an interesting kind of conversation about, does the art, well, the art drives the technology because they had to build the biggest Tesla coil ever built, but also the technology dictates maybe the appearance of the art. And then 10 years later, I got to revisit the Electrum at the farm in New Zealand where it was installed. And so here's a clip from that. And you'll notice it's higher quality because HD had been invented over the past 10 years.
Wow, going just nice.
Yes, it's the world's biggest Tesla coil. It's a very fascinating form of electricity. The Tesla coil can actually transmit electricity through the air. It is an amazing thing. You can hold a fluorescent tube on this balcony out here and it'll glow as if it's connected to the main supply.
So the sculpture is 4 stories tall and gives off 3 million volts. Wow. And then, so the art collector Alan Gibbs, who commissioned the Electrum sculpture, he saw the value in documenting the creations of these highly engineered artworks. So he commissioned me to make documentaries about some of the other pieces at his farm. So when Richard Serra came down to install his piece, which is called Te Tuhi Rangi Contour, I was there to document the installation. There are and this was really interesting because Sarah and Alan Gibbs, they locked horns on a couple of different issues over the course of the project, so that was, really good for storytelling, that conflict and drama.
I was going to ask you,
two huge personalities and just not agreeing on, like, you know, should it be concrete or steel? So, so there are 2 clips, one of installation and one of the finished piece.
Great.
Thank you.
My contract with Richard involved him selling me 56 plates of 2-inch steel formed to the shape he wanted. It's my problem to get engineers who could design a system that could hold it up. Richard's never done a work on the scale. So it's a very, very complicated piece of engineering.
And one of the interesting things about sculpture is that the artists are usually pushing technology and pushing the engineering and some of the physics right to the limit. And they tend to work by the seat of their pants and just say, well, I think we'll do this. Wave their arms around, and then we try and do it.
I could not have imagined that the piece was going to come in as well as it did.
So it was a site-specific work that followed one of the contour lines of that valley. It's a beautiful piece. And it has since it's an outdoor piece, the steel expands and contracts with the sun and heat. So they had to devise a way to kind of anchor certain points of it. So it actually grows by like 3 inches, and it, you know, it can't buckle because it's a continuous wall. So that was pretty challenging. That's in the documentary. So then Anish Kapoor also did a piece for the farm, and I have 2 clips. The first clip it shows Anish and Alan walking around the site. Imagining where the sculpture will go, and it doesn't exist yet. And then the second clip is the finished piece.
Great.
I mean, for the moment, we're in this interestingly problematic phase of the piece. And, you know, Alan, bless him, is very involved with it, to the point where there are moments where it has the feel of a kind of collaboration between him and me, even though it isn't a collaboration.
It is enormous. You're a megalomaniac, Anish.
It's a bloody enormous thing. You see that? The setting, the way the piece sits in the landscape, seems to confuse a single view of it. It's as if you form an image, and that image changes, and it becomes something else. That's confusing, and of course it's part of what the piece is about. This continual need to re-understand what the object is, just as one's kind of trying to understand what it says, or where it is, and the way it sits where it is.
Wow. What was the distance between the beginning and the end of that project?
Oh, well, the whole sculpture, it took 5 years to develop. I think, Anish visited the farm 3 times, and it was a 5-year project, and I actually had help from a local film crew to do a lot of the filming because I couldn't be there.
So were you there right at the beginning?
I actually was there at the end.
Oh, I see.
And we picked up some of the aerial shots after it was completed.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually the therapies took about 4 or 5 years too. They're long, they're big projects, huge endeavors. And Alan is actually a really interesting collaborator, I think, for an artist because he's pushing them. And then the site is so huge that they really, almost all the pieces there are the largest work that the artist has ever made because that's what goes with the scale of the place. And then more recently, I got to work with Jeff. I made a mini documentary video about his breaking wave sculpture that's around the corner. He showed clips from his beauty video, and it was a collaboration because he and Bill are both pretty handy with camera, so they documented everything the whole way. I was there to shoot the installation in February, and then they had all the materials for me to kind of tell the whole story. So
that's useful.
Yeah, it was great. It was a really fun project
like that.
Yeah. And then at the end, we put in some music by Jeff and Eric, which worked perfectly. So we can. There's a little clip of that we can show, and then.
Great. Yeah, let's watch that. That sounds great.
So we are building a kinetic sculpture called Breaking Wave, a suspension sculpture that has all this ridiculous engineering and over 1,000 moving parts in the piece. Now we've got the next 5 or so days to, put this in its actual home and test all the, nuts and bolts and details and make sure everything works. And so we've spent 7 months designing the piece in software and to create a very, very specific effect. And until this entire thing is plugged in and turned on, we have no idea if we did it right.
Can we really do this? This is pretty nuts.
It's a little crazy. I guess I'm like a math geek who grew up doing art all the time and now mixing them both together. These days I'm an artist that uses a lot of science and technology in my art.
My background has always been in the creative arts and also in aerospace engineering. So I worked in aerospace for a long time. I worked for Boeing on the West Coast. Jeff and I worked together quite a bit on all sorts of different projects.
I like to think about how to make things move in certain ways, but he's really amazing at actually making that happen.
Art,
that's fascinating.
Art and engineering.
That was great to see you. Thank you for allowing us to see his work in action. That's excellent. You just showed us the finished project. That's really neat. So was that the only time you guys have worked together?
Yeah, but I look forward to the next one.
Right,
yeah.
so far, right? And whatever that is, the future, we don't know what the future is. That's cool. We get it.
It'll probably be an app or something.
An app or something. Okay, we love that. So we're going to move on. Eric, we'd love to hear from you as well. And then we have time for more questions. So let's go into your work as well.
Sure. So I'm going to talk about some social limited projects.
Okay.
And the first one is we used to all work at a museum exhibition design firm. I think there's some people in the audience actually who work there now. And for like 7 years. And we were moonlighting as VJs. So we had this like monthly performance at a local club at Middlesex. And we were doing those shows every month, and they were really fun, but we were like, okay, we got to do something serious. So we were doing all this like video remixing, and we decided to kind of point our software, because we were writing all this crazy software that let us transform television in real time, and we decided that...
What do you mean when you say that?
Okay, so basically we created this software that lets us digitize the video, the closed captioning, so we know what everyone's saying, and the audio from a live television feed, and in real time we could take it apart,
really cool.
put it back together, and project it
on
a screen. So we were like, what's serious? What could we remix? So it was the presidential debates that we decided to do. So I have a clip, a kind of reel of, this is from, we did in 2004, 2008, and 2012. This is from the 2008 debates.
And we needed to succeed. But the important thing is, if we suffer defeat in Iraq, which General Petraeus predicts we will, if we adopted Senator Obama's set date for withdrawal, then...
We need more resources there. Senator McCain, in the rush to go into Iraq, said, you know what, we've been successful in Afghanistan. There is nobody who can pose a threat to us there. In each instance, our efforts at isolation have actually accelerated their efforts to get nuclear weapons. That will change when I'm President of the United States.
Senator, what about talking?
Well, Senator Obama twice said in debates that he would sit down with Ahmadinejad, Chavez, and Raul Castro without preconditions.
A resurgent and very aggressive Russia is a threat to the peace and stability of the region. Their actions in Georgia were unacceptable. They were unwarranted. And at this point, it is absolutely critical for the next president to make clear that we have to follow through on our six-party.
And winter's coming and home heating oil, as it is our national security and the issue of climate change that's so important.
We've got time for one more lead question segment. We're way out of, you could be quick responses.
He did not say that.
Of course not.
He said that there could be secretary level and lower level meetings. I've always encouraged them. The Iranians have met with Ambassador Crocker in Baghdad. What Senator Obama
So this is like, I think like a lot of our process is about seeing what we have in front of us. And at the time we were doing all this work with text and software and like real-time rendering and kind of just using that material and playing with it. And then as we go through this process, we start to like see all these other fun things in there and these other patterns. And so in this case, it was like about trying to deconstruct the act of watching television. So like, you're pretty mindless when you watch TV, and we were trying to kind of like shake people out of it by like hiding certain things, but also bringing memory to the whole experience and like, counting words. Right. And a little bit later, we did this in the UK for the Prime Minister debates, and we did it for some like conferences, but we started to, we discovered this amazing research going at the University of Texas, where these researchers had created this library called the Linguistic Inquiry Word Count Dictionary. Mm. And by counting the instances of like certain types of words, they basically categorize the whole English language. And by counting different types of words, you can make, like, you can ascertain the psychological state of the speaker. So you could, say that someone's speaking more categorically or someone's being more vague. And so we started to play with that and got into some really fun, like, real-time language analysis. And so the next clip is a piece that we did for a local bar called Firebrand Saints. And we were doing all this performance stuff, but it was kind of unsustainable because we wanted to start a business. And so we started to think about some more permanent forms that this work could take. So we've got a clip of, there we go. This is an artwork that sits behind the bar and perpetually watches and deconstructs television. So whatever they've got on the television, so there's 5 TVs, and the leftmost TV is just a live feed hooked up to cable, and they could set that to, Sox game or the soap opera or whatever, and the right foremost screens are basically like taking the signal apart and putting it back together. And there's all these different ways. So like this one's looking at language that talks about the past, the present, and the future. And this one, it works really good with reality TV. I think this is like, what is this? Desperate Housewives of Orange County, I think. And this one, is just kind of is like degrading the signal as you move from left to right and lowering the resolution more and more. And this one's looking for faces, and it's amazing the faces that people make when you catch them. You'll see some good ones here. And it's good when it makes mistakes too. That's another fun thing about all this technology, is because technology is still pretty dumb, and it's really entertaining when it finds something that it thinks is a face, and it's just not a face at all. And this one is looking at kind of memory, and like we have like a set of keywords, and it's anytime someone speaks about that keyword, it brings back all the sentences that they use that word in. And so it's kind of been really fun to explore this space. We've done a bunch of different pieces around this kind of general approach.
So I read your bio, and I looked at some of your work, of course, and I was thinking to myself, so you're deconstructing television, right, media, so why? Can you talk about the why? I'm going to actually ask you guys this because I want to know why you want to do that and what you were frustrated with, or what's your motivation?
Well, I can make up some like, you know, really
don't make
artful sounding story about why we do this, but like really we had these tools that we had been building, and we wanted to point them at something different, and we tried pointing them at television, right? And that just started to like take us down this wormhole of experiments. And I think, I mean, I guess like then as we developed the narrative of what we were doing and like kind of thought about what it meant, like one of the reasons was to try to disrupt the experience of watching television. I mean, it's a really old medium, and I guess a few years back, amazingly, it was still going strong. But I think I don't look at the numbers, but like I think it's starting to like, you know, die a little bit, slow death, and like with all this like internet streaming based stuff. And but it just was like this kind of right place. All these, you know, video artists in the '70s did some amazing work, you know, looking at TV and like taking TV apart. So we were, you know, just interested in.
So are you, when you're watching TV, are you feeling restless? Were you guys feeling restless, like you want to just disrupt like this linear, old-fashioned kind of form? I'm just looking for your.
Yeah, I think
what
it was
were you frustrated with?
I think it was more just play. I think we were
just
playing.
having fun.
Yeah, we were totally. I think the whole thing was done in the spirit of like playfulness, really.
And so, what do you do with that now? So talk to me a bit about how you take something like that and then bring it into the larger world. So you're, you know, I'm looking at the first one, I'm thinking, well, actually, I thought your motivation was political at first, but then I couldn't see any bias, right? So I'm a journalist, so I'm looking for that. I'm like, where is he gonna go there? Is he gonna make fun of Obama or McCain, or what are you gonna do there? So you didn't actually. You kept it pretty cool. So what do you do with these pieces now that they're done? What happens to them?
So I guess we've taken the kind of linguistic analysis stuff in a bunch of different directions. We did some interesting pieces for the London Olympics and for this last year's Super Bowl, where we basically like monitored the way that people were talking about the sports on Twitter and turned that into a daily light show on the London Eye and the Empire State Building. So we've kind of been these like, you know, strange turns in the work, but maybe I could use this as a segue to kind of talk about some of the, and this is the last project I'll talk about, but we started to do some more sculptural work, and a lot of this is in collaboration with Jeff and Bill, actually the engineer who worked on Breaking Waves.
We need to meet Bill.
Yeah, for real.
Bill is like a guy.
He's an amazing,
he should be right here.
Amazing guy. If you could roll the CSIS clip. So this is a chandelier that we made for a think tank in Washington, D.C. called the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and they do a lot of work around like international issues, and they've been around for a really long time. And so we wanted to create a piece for their new atrium that really like captured their work. And the idea is it's these 450 hanging pendants. Each one can glow with a white light, and as you know, from the sides and from around the atrium, it's just this kind of beautiful, glowing, twinkling form. And as you pass underneath, it coalesces into a map of the world. And we're showing different data sets on there. We're showing like GDP and water usage and energy consumption. And the approach to a piece like this is to kind of take this data that they're working with, that's at the root of the think tank's work, and to try to create a much more open artistic interpretation of it. And the really nice thing about that I think we're getting more and more interested in is it's a beautiful like kind of launch pad for storytelling. You know, someone comes into the space, they see this thing and they ask like, what is that? There's something going on there. You could tell it has some sort of structure to it. And then someone who works there, anybody could, you know, start to tell the story of the piece, and that's like a beautiful entry point into, you know, thousands of different stories that you can tell about this data.
So what were some of the best stories you heard? Just give me one.
So I actually didn't even personally go down and work on this. My partner John is really, but actually the best story for the installation was one of the workers. The space was being built as we were installing this, and one of the workers came up to my partner John, and he says, "Yeah, man," he's like, "You got to go down at the bottom and just lay down and look up. It's amazing."
I like to do that. It's
and that was like for us like a real like moment of success, because I think like, you know, I think all of us are interested in speaking to a wider audience and like connecting with people, and for us to connect with this totally unexpected audience was like really exciting.
Is part of the last piece that you showed us, is it? Are you actually inspired by the editorial content? So the GDP, or is that significant to you? Is that in your psyche about trying to communicate the, you know, the intellectual part of what you were doing in your art?
For this project, I think, so a lot of these projects are like on the border of kind of art and design, and like we don't, at So-So, we like kind of stop calling ourselves designers or artists because we're just kind of doing it. So there was this motivation to just kind of express the mission of the think tank.
And how did you do that? Did they give you like, okay, we like the GDP and good luck? What kind of conversation? I'm so interested in that conversation.
Sure, it was very open. They gave us a lot of creative control.
That's great.
Yeah, I think we were looking for data that was like kind of very like at the base of what their work was, and something that would be easy to capture and represent on the sculpture. So.
Okay, so now we're going to move into just a more open discussion, and because you guys actually know each other and have collaborated, I want to point out a couple of things I think is great. So in the world of journalism, traditionally people don't collaborate, actually, news organizations, or it's very competitive. So one thing I was just listening to you guys talk about is how often each one of you, even though you're really different and the work you do is different, you keep using the word collaborate. So was this just who you guys are, or is this just hard-baked into the necessity of creating something together? Maybe you could take that on. The act of collaboration, which is, I think, what we're talking about tonight, right? Is this intersection means different people, unless you're just completely a genius and you can do everything yourself, which is not, you know, sometimes possible, I suppose.
Yeah, I would say I spent probably the first 10 years of working on art trying to just do it all by myself, to kind of to maintain a sense of control.
Yeah.
Because it takes a sense of real trust to give part of that thing to just leave it to somebody else to be in control of. And for me, that took a long time. It was a slow lesson learned. And then it started to convert into more of this sense of like Voltron. Like you can meet these people like Eric, and you can meet these people like Bill, who you ask him to hang something that's 90,000 pounds, and he's like, okay. You know, and suddenly you get people like that in the same room and start to have a conversation, and the idea space just grows in this enormous way where you wouldn't even be able to entertain some of those ideas for more than a second because of your own filters.
Right.
So what I've started to realize is when I was trying to work on these things and control them myself, I was always like so concerned about how this thing was going to be when it was done. It was going to be this shining thing, and people were going to like this thing. And I was always unwittingly putting a lot of weight into this object. And as things phased into focusing on collaboration, I realized that all I want to do is have fun at work that day.
Oh, that's really interesting.
It doesn't really matter what happens 8 months down the road. You need something, and it's got to be Bill, and et cetera, et cetera. But suddenly that flip happened, and I realized that I just want to hang out with my friends that I have fun talking about stuff with. And then the work started getting a lot more fun and playful.
That's so interesting. So, but the authorship piece, is that complicated?
Not anymore, but it was when I was letting go of the sense of control of it, for sure.
Right. Oh, who's moving? We're all being very well behaved. So, no, I was just really curious about your language, because I think the collaboration is crucial. And Alberta, that's actually what you've been filming, right? I mean, you've been filming these active collaborations that are happening between people that are unlikely collaborators, right? I'm so surprised to see the open collaboration, and the tensions, of course, help your story and help us understand it better. Can you tell me, you may not, tell me one of the most surprising conversations you heard? Like, what is something that they were really agonizing over that they couldn't just sort of like get to the bottom of? Well, maybe you were dealing with some of it in one of your clips where the engineer was saying, oh, these artists, they just have these dreams, and then we have to say, come on, that doesn't work in engineering terms. So maybe if you could flesh that out a little.
Well, definitely the Sarah piece, at one point in the project, I think they were having trouble sourcing how to make plates that tall, because they couldn't make it like a ribbon the long way. They had to actually make it into 56 pieces and put them together because of the way that, you know, the whatever they call them, presses, steel. They make giant like ships with these presses. They're ship making things. And at one point, I think Alan brought up the idea of building the sculpture in concrete. And Richard was very against that idea. So he was, you know,
why was
he was
he
going to walk.
against-
Well, Richard Serra is the man of steel.
Right, so
He
he's like Mr.
builds in
Steel.
He's,
Right.
and he just knew that he was not going to do it in concrete. And so he was ready to walk. And they just...
So ready to walk, like, see ya, I'll find somebody else who can do this for me?
Yeah, I'm not going to do this piece. And then, you know, I guess they found a place to do it at the budget they wanted, and it all worked out, luckily.
So, and how did the engineer feel in that process? I'm sorry, I know Sarah's name, but I don't know the engineer's name.
Oh, Peter Boardman, the engineer. He, I think at that point it was kind of a budget issue. The engineer was a structural engineer, and it was his job to, like, you know, design the foundations. Like, the thing has like 30-foot foundations into the ground, and the way it moved, that expansion and contraction piece.
Right.
But the engineer, I think, maybe advised Gibbs, but I think it was Alan's kind of decision.
And just in general, because it's so interesting that you've made this, at least for now, your life's work to actually document this intersection. So that makes you very unusual. So you're an observer.
Yeah.
Right? That's really, really cool. What have you observed that has surprised you? I mean, what's surprising to you in this? Are things changing? Are people talking more productively?
I can be, like I said, I can be a fly on a wall right there in a time where something is being created or there's a transformation taking place. And after I film it or whatever, it's just going to be totally different. Like the Sarah piece, the breaking wave, it's there now. It's beautiful. It's pristine. It's like magic. It was a real mess when you're installing it, you know, but it's just capturing that process and letting other people see it. I mean, there's a whole story behind the creation. I mean, there's also the development and the inspiration, but the actual building of something also gives me, as a visual storyteller, you know, this payoff, you know? So it's like, the thing is done, it's amazing, it works, yay. So yeah, it's a lot of collaboration on a lot of different levels that I've seen. And I guess I started out doing this because I was thinking, I was making science documentaries for like Discovery Channel and National Geographic, but I thought, how can I make a different kind of science documentary that no one else is going to be making to kind of differentiate myself? So I thought I'd make science documentaries about art, which is kind of, some of this I think might fall into that category, because I think I get into more of the process maybe than someone who is only, you know, interested in the artistic aspects, so.
And what did you study? You said I
was a biologist.
You were a biologist. Yeah. So, and when you made this shift, why? Why did you make the shift?
Well, I was a biologist. I was working in LA. So I think just being in that environment with a lot of friends who worked in production and communications, I just wanted to get more into like science communications. Yeah.
And so when you look back at the films you've done, like when you're looking at this body of work, do you think, I mean, I'm just so curious because it seems to me, just as an observer, as a journalist looking in and watching my child grow up in this new world, you know, he's exposed to so much more than I would ever have been exposed to as a child, just in this intersection. It's completely like the buzz thing right now. I mean, actually, while we were talking earlier, Sam and I were saying, well, it's STEM, now it's STEAM, so everybody's into this, right? And so my kids are just growing up with the expectation of this intersection, actually, right? So I'm curious if you've seen in the 10 years you've been documenting this, do you see this happening between, not with children and educators, but more with artists and engineers, where there's an expectation of the intersection, a necessity? Are you seeing that start to happen? Or does it still feel like, okay, it's really going to take the next generations, like you guys are younger, and then the people in your films, and then my kids' generation who will just grow up. Like, of course art is an engineering, and it's one and the same, and are you crazy if you don't think about art and design? And maybe they're the same thing, right? So have you seen that with the generation of people you're working with?
Well, it's kind of like what Jeff said. I mean, maybe a collaboration between an artist and an engineer can just enable people to think bigger and envision things outside of their normal, you know, to just expand their horizons and have more to build with and more to build on.
Okay, so Eric, I'm gonna ask you some questions. So how did you get to be this person sitting here right now and dancing and singing, and you went to MIT. I've read your, I know all about you, sort of. So how did you get to the point where you're doing this extremely creative work and you don't know exactly what to call yourself? What was your trajectory?
The trajectory? I was studying computer science at MIT and not terribly excited about what I was working on, and then...
But how did you even go into computer science? Or were you in high school like, I have to go to MIT and I'm a computer scientist guy? Was that you, or...?
No, I mean, like, there's some gentle nudging by my dad, who's an engineer, and then like just science camp every summer, and like I took this like really cool class in high school where we like did holograms and like we made like little TENS units, and we did all this like fun stuff, and so I was kind of I thought I was into it, and I mean, I was pretty excited, but I like graduated MIT more like spaced out and like writing poems than I'd like ever been before, and so then...
The reverse of most of us when we went to college like that, right? Okay, I get it.
And then I like for my master's project, I was doing an undergraduate, like they call them year ops at the Media Lab, when you could work with a graduate student, and I proposed this project for my master's to make this like vibrating suit, and like they approved it, the stars were all aligned, and so for my master's in electrical engineering, I made a vibrating suit. Wow. I don't know how they gave me that.
What did the suit do? MIT is great.
They are. It's a special place.
Great. It's very special.
It's a very special place, yeah.
So what was the purpose of the vibrating suit?
It was the whole idea.
Not to be mispractical here.
The whole idea was to explore the sense of touch as like a compositional medium. So like in the same way that you create sound and you make music, to use the space of the body as almost like a stage for this kind of invisible dance that you feel.
So I would have let you do a master's. That sounds good.
Excellent. And that work, I mean, that's kind of always been like a personal like side kind of thread of mine, and I've continued to build various like sculptures over the years that use vibrations in strange and surprising ways. And then, so then working at I got a day job working at this small design firm for years. I learned how to program there. So I had like on first week of the job, I was like, at breakfast reading C++ books and like trying to figure out like how to program. And so eventually kind of, got my chops there after 7 years. And then my partners who also worked there, we were doing this moonlighting as VJs, and we decided to start our own company. That was like 5 years ago.
Wow. So how is that going? And talk to me about, like, again, was the same questions I'm asking Alberta. I'm looking for the conversations that you guys are having and where it can go off the rails and how you get it back. Just help me understand the tensions.
Yeah, I mean...
Or maybe there's no tensions in the world. It's all good.
No, there's absolutely tensions. I mean, I think, like,
You guys are all so nice, so you just seem so happy. So maybe,
Like, I think the primary, most tensions come from some kind of, like, ego, and I think we've, like, all probably worked our way through that. I mean, like, I know me and my partners at SoSo over the years have, like, kind of just chipped away at it, worked away at it. I mean, like, trying to work together was hard at first. Like, it was really hard. And
so who do you work with? Like, what kind of people do you have? Like, who's on your team?
So my partners, John and Justin, Justin had a background in physics, and then he did, like, media arts stuff, and John has architecture education. And then we have a bunch of designers and some programmers working with, some people who kind of, have a little bit of both going on.
Do you guys find generationally, because I'm just so curious again about the generational divide and how things are changing and shifting, do you find that when you're looking at collaborating with people, is it almost easier to work with younger people that are just growing up in this? Like maybe even people in their early 20s or late teens, or can you talk to me about that? Like, what are you seeing? Are people changing? Is this becoming sort of almost like I was saying, like fait accompli? Of course you would combine these ideas instead of what happened to you, which is you started one way and then had an epiphany and came back to it. And
I think every generation hits some point and then looks at the next generation as magicians. Like, how are they at 10 years old doing stuff I don't understand?
Right.
And
Do you feel that way?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
So reassuring.
Especially with like phone-oriented
God,
technology.
You just made my night. That's how I think about my 8-year-old. I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah, so it seems to go in this direction. If I want to work with someone that's going to just like be able to kind of tackle all of these new things, like now like web technologies and things like that, it's like every week there's just a new thing.
Right.
And if you meet someone who's still got that kind of voraciousness of trying to learn all they can learn about stuff, then that seems to go to that kind of age. And then if you want the wisdom of having been through 80 things and not trying to learn a whole new set of things, but actually deepen the knowledge and exploit the knowledge they've got, that seems to go the other way. So there's just like the whole range is available. It seems like everyone offers different parts of the whole
Do you kind of wish you were growing up now? I'm just curious. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, do you wish you were, you know, a child now exposed to all these different things, the multidimensional aspects of education? And I mean, by the way, this isn't happening in all of America. This may be happening in Boston, but you know, there is a revolution happening in education, especially in the arts and sciences and math and engineering. And it is quite radically different than it was just a number of like 3 or 4 years ago. And I've seen it. You know, I'm seeing and I'm witnessing it. So do you kind of wish you were in the midst of that? Are you happy you grew up, you know, 25, 30 years ago and you had, I'm assuming, a more traditional education? No, I don't know. Maybe you had an incredible engineering, you know, elementary school. But how do you feel about that?
I think there's a lot of issues that are being worked through right now that I would fear my mind going through those issues. My mind has a propensity to latch on to things and thoughts and ideas, and there's such an incredible bandwidth now of information that I think we're just naturally seeing the echoes of that in all of these kind of attentional issues, and being able to just sit with one thing for 10 minutes, which is becoming impossible. Whereas we're getting all of this breadth of knowledge with a different sense of depth. So I don't know, I'd almost be just as curious to have grown up, you know, 1,000 years ago, where life just worked at a different speed, and kind of see how that would affect the mind. But only knowing what I know now, kind of being able to compare them in some way. I think we're going to see some amazing things in the next 20, 30 years as we start to see that all of these incredible movements in technology do not solve our problems. They just offer new paradoxes to be figured out. And that's all interesting to me, but I don't want to go through that again.
Right. It's so true.
I'm totally jealous. I like, the kids tell me these classes they're taking.
Jealous.
I'm like, there's a class in that? Like,
no, I can't believe the things that children can learn. It's like really inspiring. And I even still think it's going to go, or we don't even know what the future of education for younger people is going to look like. But I do also understand what you're saying about the intentional stuff. I see it. I'm witnessing it. You have to be really careful as a parent. And as a person, right? We're all living this right now. So when you look at the future, Alberta, what are you thinking about next? Like, will you keep documenting this space? Or do you predict that there will be a time when it's just all merged together and you won't see the tensions for your storytelling?
Well, I mean, I think there will always be like large, institutionally backed, you know, huge sculptures that require lots of engineering, but I do, I don't know, the projects kind of, you know, come, it's hard to say, like, whether, wait, what was the question again?
What do you think you're going to do next? Like, let's start with that one.
Well, actually, my next big project is kind of a media project, and it's having to do with technology and the internet. It's kind of a global citizen science project. So, kind of to map the world's faces. The idea is for people to be able to compare their faces with other faces and create like a giant catalog of every face, and maybe interesting ethnography information will come out of that, facial morphology ideas, but that's a little bit kind of art and science. It's technology. We all recognize faces and we communicate with our faces. So that's my next project. It's not really a documentary, but I kind of see it as a platform for storytelling, for people to kind of use this to kind of discover about their family history and their ancestry. So it's kind of a platform for people to discover their own stories. So it's going to launch in January.
Oh, that's excellent. Okay, is it a web-based project or is it
it's an app? It's an app and a website. It's called Face Topo. Yeah.
Oh, wow. We'll take a look at that. I didn't know about that. Great. And what about you, Eric? And then we're going to actually open up to the audience questions. So you get to go. What are you going to do next? What's up with you? What are you doing?
More dancing.
More dancing.
Yeah, my wife and I are working on some, like, I guess, interactive dance films, you could call them. Like, so
is she a filmmaker?
She's a modern dancer.
Oh, excellent.
So she's been teaching me a lot, and we've been entering this, like, fun and strange space of, yeah, I think that's the best way to describe them. Interactive dance films, yeah.
Interactive dance film. I love that. That's great. Okay, good. So let's open up for some other questions, and then I can always pipe in if there aren't others. So we're going to go to Twitter, right? Do you want to start now?
Questions as of now on Twitter, so I think we're going to take it to the audience.
Okay, great. First of all, I'm going to ask you guys a question, which I meant to do it first. How many of you all think of yourselves as artists? Oh, wow. Okay, and engineers? Okay, now scientists? I love that. Okay. What else should I ask? What are the people who haven't answered? What do you do? Okay, well, they're shy. You know what? That's okay, I get it. But you can't be too shy to ask questions, so please, one of you guys ask a question, please. I mean, I have a million questions, so, you know. Yes, please.
Mike?
Hi, thanks for the talk. It's been really intriguing, and I'm really curious about your process of designing or the way you develop concepts. As a person who was mechanical engineering and now I'm trying to move more into design, it's easier for me to sort of pursue, like, pick a method and then sort of explore different ideas rather than the other way around. But sometimes my concept suffers because I pick the method first, so I don't explore the whole space of what you could do. So I'm curious, like, how you guys develop your concepts.
That's a big question.
That's a really good question. I mean, I think, like, one of the interesting things about, like, being kind of fluent in the engineering side of things, and is that you are fluent and you can really kind of, like, speak it as a second language. And I think, like, some of the best ideas, like, come, and I think Jeff talked about this a little bit earlier when he was showing his sculpture, like, some of the best ideas just come from the method. So, like, just starting with the method and not trying to really achieve anything, but, like, just understanding, like, what is this technology about? What is this approach about? And trying to kind of improvise with just the approach and see what emerges.
And that's sort of what happened when you were actually working in the television medium to disrupt us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
To sit around and do everything you could to kind of see what emerged from that. Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
I would also add just the reference to any child that you see that's 2 or 3 years old just has stuff in front of them and is immediately always playing with permutations and just riffing off ideas. And you know, when Eric and I meet to do that for an atrium sculpture, it's ideally like us being 2-year-olds. It's ideally like us not saying, oh, we got this big commission we got to figure out. It's ideally like, oh, what blankets look weird in the wind. What's that about? How do you make that 60 feet large? Or just kind of these images. And usually, I guess something that strikes me about a lot of these kind of meetings and riffing is you have to sometimes have like 30 bad ideas that are all based on the previous bad idea, and then all of a sudden you land in somewhere that's like, whoa, how did we get here? And if while you're brainstorming you're saying, this is a bad idea, none of those things ever flourish. And to take these ideas that and not kind of evaluate them, but just see how they make you feel intuitively and what other new weird visual thing comes to mind or emotional thing comes to mind from that, seems to kind of fork out in this geometric way, whereas if you have one goal in mind, everywhere you are, you're trying to point to that goal. If where you are, it's just leading you down 20 paths, then that leads to 80 billion things 3 steps down the road. So it's kind of just having this openness to not knowing where you're supposed to go, and just realizing that there's something about this element that makes me curious. And I feel like that drives all the stuff that I work on, and probably all the stuff all of us work on.
I think for people who are in the profession of making things that are actually like have an end result, like a film, or even a television show or a piece of journalism, I think one of the most amazing forums that I've seen pop up everywhere, the hackathon, they give you the ability to do exactly what you're saying, but in a structured way. So you just enter into this world where you're promising yourself you're not going to actually decide what it is until you've gone through the really amazing exploratory process. And for me, the first time I did it, it was really difficult to just stop producing. Just stop having that like reflex of I have to decide, what it is because I'm a producer, right? So I think that's a really interesting comment about just letting yourself be a 2 or 3-year-old or 4 or 5-year-old. And I think the Media Lab actually has something where they try to actually simulate being the eternal 5 and 6-year-old, right? Like where they say you can't go beyond 6. And when I heard that, I thought that was utterly brilliant. Having young children and watching their minds and how flexible they are. Any other questions? Yes. Oh yeah. Actually, the fellow in the back, and then we'll come to you.
When you're going through the creative process, do software engineering techniques still apply? Like, do you go through Scrum, Agile processes, or do you do source control, version control on your creative ideas and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it took a few years to like become more rigorous in that respect, but now we're pretty rigorous about that. And I think that like once you're at a certain point in the process, it just makes things go so much easier, and it lets you kind of focus on what's important and not get bogged down by like the technical side of things.
So you're just like noting the whole way through.
Yeah, using the tools that...
Right, so you just keep noting that's very interesting, right?
There's all these tools that are kind of used in modern software development at like, companies making like actual like, useful products and things. And I think, they really do enable the creative process and to try to make it more fluid and...
And it doesn't cut into your creative space because it's just sort of second nature to you?
It can cut into the creative space. I think there is always this like balance between like the sort of I guess like the elegance of the code you're writing, because like writing code is an art in and of itself, and there's elegant code. There's there's beautiful code, and sometimes you just have to let that go, and you have to write really ugly code, just to get to where you want to get.
That's great. You had a question? Yeah.
I'm very interested in the way that you conceive your idea. You get an idea. And once you get an idea, in the making of the result, in the making of the art, you mentioned earlier, Jeff, about happy accident. I'm sure there are unhappy accidents as well. So my question is this, in the process, how much do you allow the accident to change the idea, to modify your idea as you go along, and how much do you insist on your idea and try to find different ways? If it doesn't work, I insist on finding another way in order to get your original idea. And when you look back at your work, can you say how much of it you had it earlier and how much of it is along the journey of discovery as you are making it?
Yeah, if I look back over kind of chronologically the last 15 years or so of mixing those worlds together, all the early stuff was pretty much like, this is what I want to do, and now start breaking down how to make this happen. And the more time that goes on, the more there seems to be this sense of openness that there is no final idea and that nothing is ever done. And as Arthur Ganson said one time, there's just the day that it has to be in the museum or something like that. But you could just take it forever because it's a constant riff. And so the riffing that happens if we're in a riffing session to come up with something that we haven't even started, that has a kind of internal deadline to present something to somebody. But if you have a good relationship with that person, if it's going somewhere, that goes all the way to the last day and maybe even beyond it. You know, maybe you're constantly riffing after making changes to it. It's always this balance between practicality, because if you leave yourself infinitely open, sometimes you're paralyzed. You have an infinite explorative space. You know, there's a reason there's 12 notes in the scale and not like an infinite number of notes in the scale. It's easier to make stuff out of those patterns. So I feel like it's always this balance of practicality and playfulness, and just actually saying, you know, this accident, like you said, this accident is not an accident I like, but maybe if I explore that accident, it'll lead to these other accidents. And there's just so many things. I think the mind always wants to pretend that it can understand everything. And it's just so far from the case, you know? And when you actually just are open to, oh, these metal balls came back and they're not at all how I looked, and there's this weird feature. Well, what if we push that weird feature? Maybe it'll turn into something interesting. Suddenly the amount that you move through the creative space just changes dramatically, because you're not predefined. You're just floating around, and these things are just coming at you all the time.
When I watched you looking at your artwork, I had this funny flash of, you know, whenever I watch a film, and I'm sure you're the same way, you're always thinking, oh my God, I could have made the sequence better. So I was curious, because they're such finished pieces of work, and yours too, right? The one that's hanging in the think tank. Did you feel like those were finished when you're watching them? Do they feel finished now that they're displayed and they're public art and they're there?
I guess they're finished to the degree that I've let go of needing to change anything.
Yeah, it's like a Taoist idea to do your work and just let it go.
You just have to let it go.
Yeah, it's really, it makes everything easier.
Great.
And definitely with filmmaking, you know, with editing, you can always change something, edit something, tweak. There's always something you can try, but you just, at a certain point, have to
let it go. Right.
I would say I don't practice this at all, so I should not be preaching it. But if you force yourself every day for a year to come up with an idea and get it into some kind of done state, you don't have to build anything. Just like go through the process of like conception and okay, this would be this, and letting it go. You change so dramatically the inertia of your feeling of like, oh, I'm just going to have an idea and it's going to be finished. And otherwise there's just a sense of paralysis. I mean, sometimes we've felt playing music, at least I have felt totally paralyzed, like, oh, there's just like 88 notes. What am I going to possibly do with 88 notes? And then sometimes it's like, oh, a C chord, really interesting. Let's just turn this into a 4-bar thing and leave it and then do something else. And there's something about the fluidity that comes from just putting yourself in a practice where you just develop momentum. And to me, like, that's the most important part of any of these practices, whether it's music or whether it's building art or doing science. It's like the first day you start a new project, sometimes it's just like this open, who knows where to go, so that can cause paralysis. But on the 80th day, you're just in it, and you remember the feeling of like, I can get so much done in one day. So if that can be cultivated to feel that every day, it can really change the fluidity.
Let's take that forward. I love that idea. I'm going to try that. Not with what you do. I'm going to try it too. Let's try it. Let's promise we'll do it at least for 7 days, and then I'll email you how to go. So we have a question from Twitter.
Yes, we have a question from Ben Bloomberg, and it's directed to Jeff. Jeff, are each of the elements in Breaking Wave individually controlled?
Okay, so maybe we can cue up the second half of. Do you have a clip that does more of that?
The installation.
Awesome. Okay,
and
so
the explaining of the
Oh, it even has the explanation.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
You're already talking in it.
Well, as you mentioned, sometimes it's better to just hear me on a screen than it is to hear me here.
You're pretty good. You're pretty good.
Okay, it's one of my Breaking Wave clips. It's Breaking Wave install. That's what I want.
What does this have?
It has a
This is the kind of crunch week. You know, this is the install week where everything we've been doing is in prototype phase and also the final thing, but not in the real location. As far as the whole project goes, I would say we are about 97% of the way through. So all this stuff is the main 13 components of the assembly. This is what we call the Starship Enterprise for obvious reasons. This is kind of the master control that generates all the motion, all this stuff. It will do something, but we have no idea if it will do what we envisioned it doing. So you'll see some more detail, but all I'll say is that we just really enjoy screwing stuff together, I think. So this was a kind of crazy excuse to play around with a bunch of mechanics. This could be built with all separate controllability, where everything is computer controlled, and there's 804 separate controllers. And Bill and I, basically for purposes of just what we prefer doing, just for the fun of it, we're much more interested in having it be a single mechanism where everything was interconnected. So there's this one huge cam, and it's kind of forking out and driving all of these things in independent ways. So it's all actually, there's just one motor, and all you do is flip the on switch and the whole thing does it. And it can't do anything else. There's a lot of amazing arts groups like Art+Com that do a lot of installations like this where they can play these beautiful animations. This can do one thing. It takes 80 seconds and there's no control over it. But once you build it that way, it's much simpler of a piece. There's much less things that can break, even though it looks totally not simple compared to the alternatives of how to do it. It actually is. There's no way to even reach the center of it.
It's amazing to see this being built. Thank you, Alberta, because you'd have no idea. At least I wouldn't, right? That's great. Did you have other questions?
Yes, we have one more question from David Small, and his question is, do you prefer permanent things or transient creations?
And who is that for? Was it directed to anyone?
I think it's directed at everyone.
Okay, Eric, you're going first, because I can't wait to hear what you have to say about that one.
Permanent things versus transient creations. I mean, permanent things are fun because you can show them to people. You could bring lots of people to, bring people by and they last for a long time. But they're also can be painful because people call you like a year in, 5 years in, and they ask you to fix them when they break. That happens often. But I mean, I think transient things are thrilling, they're because you don't know what's going to happen often. I mean, especially if they're in some way improvisational, like a dance or like a musical performance. I think those things, there's a lot more excitement embedded in that, because it's there and then it's gone.
Right. Alberta?
Well, I think the documentation can really kind of prolong the life of and the reach of any artwork, whether it's transient or permanent.
Right, that's a great answer. So you answered it by answering it.
Yeah, it's cool too when she was saying that it's like somehow the documentary makes the transient part permanent.
Permanent. This is, we think about this a lot in documentary, right?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's easier to keep videos working 10 years down the line than pieces like this.
I had never thought of that conundrum. That's a conundrum. I never thought about it. Forgive me. That's part of the stress around building something like this is you have to keep it working, of course.
And that's true for transients.
A film keeps working, usually.
Yeah.
It could get wrong, though. It can become wrong. Right? So you say it can become wrong.
It's true. Even time can change our judgment of it.
Oh, no, absolutely.
I think that the easiest metaphor for me is, and this is transient or permanent, is that the first time you leave one of those pieces running it's like leaving an infant in another room for the first time. It's like you are just waiting to hear a cry, and you're like this. You're like this. You're not chilling out. You're just, something's going to happen at some point because no mechanical thing lasts forever. So it's going to break, and the question is it going to break in a minute, an hour, a day, a month, or a year? Because these kind of errors are usually geometric in that way. You build a prototype and it breaks after 10 minutes, and you fix those things, and then it lasts like an hour, and then it breaks, and then it lasts 100 hours, and it breaks. These totally new things come up. And when you have 7 months to develop an installation that's supposed to be there for like 10 or 20 years, there's just no way. We did accelerated tests. There's no way you can guess the things that are going to come up. We did actually, let's cue the Absolute Quartet video.
Sure.
This is a funny link. This is a machine that I built with a friend, Dan Paluska, who's another alum from MIT, where a user, we were both roboticists and musicians, and so we wanted to do a piece that would let people play music with no music background by building a robot that could play it for you. And so you would play a little 5-second melody. Cool. You know, like Bach would take a 5-second melody and turn it into a whole fugue. And so here you would play a little 5-second melody, and this instrument that we built would play it in a way that no human being could ever play. And so the only thing I'll say, I'll let it play a little bit. It's making a tune out of that theme that's completely, you know, unique, and it fires 250,000 balls a day. So it's called a quartet because there's 3 instruments and you become the fundamental 4th person in the band by giving it the theme. So there's kind of wine glasses doing the dinner party trick, there's the percussion, and then there's this thing that we call the ballistic marimba. But to your point, we're firing 250,000 balls a day on this machine, and that means if you miss 1 in 10,000 times, every day there's 30 balls on the floor. And so, you know, you build the first one and it misses half the time, and then you build the second one and it misses 2% of the time, and then you keep kind of whittling away at these design factors. And you know, if we had gone into that thinking like, okay, we're going to build this thing, it's just going to work, it would have been horribly disappointing. But knowing that you're going to have to go through 5 revisions, eventually, you know, things like the fins that are throughout this piece, they were not part of the original design. We thought we'd just be able to do it. It'd be really easy, you know? And then you just find out the hard way, and you keep iterating and kind of blocking these things away, and it slowly carves its way to, after a while, it just works for weeks and weeks and no one calls you.
Wow.
And then you finally let go of the chair. And
so where is this?
Oh, well.
Knowing this is amazing. I want to go to this with everybody. I'll take everybody to this. I'm so glad you said that. We're looking for a home for this thing. It's sitting really? Like
in
my home? You mean
like your home? You viewers can be the one. This is a collaboration with Absolut, the Swedish vodka company, and you know, since Warhol they've been doing these kind of commissions, and now it's in 13 crates in their warehouse, waiting for a long-term installation. You know, it takes us about a week or 2 to set it up, so you can't like show it for a day. So we're looking for people to kind of take ownership of it. So if anyone's interested.
Oh, that's amazing. And how big is something like that? Just and if you take the space.
Yeah, it's the size of the stage. It's about 16 feet wide. We took a concert marimba, and we had the marimba company customize one that could be spread out instead of having the keys too close together, because we wouldn't be able to engineer the marimba.
Wow, it's amazing. Are there more questions from Twitter?
Yes, we have one more, and I'm sorry if I pronounced this last name incorrectly, but Justin Fleury has a question for Jeff and Eric. Can you talk about the challenges of making the OK Go video, End Love?
Yeah, maybe we should show it first for at least a little bit.
Sure.
We did a music video with OK Go.
Oh, cool. This is fun.
Eventually make up your mind, 'cause no one's gonna find
Yeah, I guess we'll watch it all in the background. I don't know what Eric's viewpoint would be. For me, it was definitely the fact that we had to choreograph one continuous 21-hour dance that was going to be either played 50 times slower, like in clips like this, or up to 500 times faster, like when they're sleeping in a sleeping bag.
Right.
And there was kind of like one chance to get it right because the sun only sets one time a day and that sort of thing.
It was terrifying. The most terrifying project I've ever worked on. It was like we were going to do 2 shoots, and the first day we had to like hit the sunset point, and the first like 10 feet we started pushing the dolly and the wheel falls off. So the whole thing was shot. So we like did it as like a practice run, and then we waited 2 days and did the real thing. But like, I think the whole thing was like choreographed, like everything in like a week maybe, like in film.
We had 10 days out there.
Yeah. But it was amazing working with these guys because they
You guys filmed it and did the whole thing, or did you have a whole crew with you?
There was a crew.
Yeah,
there was a crew. A lot of people.
Wow, you guys are pretty talented. We could hire you. This is complicated.
And these guys are amazingly collaborative. I mean, like they push the idea. We had filmed like a kind of preview of this with like me jumping around in a red suit around Boston, and like then like we sent that to them, and they just took the idea and like pushed it. Like, we got to do a continuous shot. We got to like keep making it crazier and crazier.
There's a theme about suits. I like this. This is good. So this is a great way for us to end the most creative thing I've ever seen on a panel in a very long time. And I think the work you guys do is remarkable, and I can't wait to keep watching the work that you do, and you can inspire all sorts of people to think more creatively. And that's really what you're all about, right? So it's terrific. So thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. And we'll look forward to more questions after, and thanks so much.
Thank you.